It's it's kind of funny for you to say, as an older person, you need newer things explained to you sometimes, because I feel like a big part of what we're here to talk about is, your fairly groundbreaking work with voice swap and the AI revolution that's happening. I mean, it seems like you're kind of still very much on the edge of that sort of thing.
Dude, you give me a cutting edge machine learning model and I'm fine. But if you try and get me to log into fucking TikTok, we got a problem.
That's fair. I mean,
I don't know what. Yeah, I know what happened with me, man. Something about social media and me just don't seem to get on. Like I don't really see myself as being somebody that is particularly camera facing. And I always enjoyed with my music career kind of being a bit almost mysterious and being in the background. So I haven't really sort of embraced those platforms, which obviously is almost like career suicide in this day and age as an artist. But, luckily I've kind of got my other sides of the things that I do, and that's kind of where I'm focused now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny to think about. I was just talking with my partner last night about, because, I'm getting older too. I'm 40, and it's, music, of course, is a young person's game. And so I think over a long career, you always have those conversations with yourself periodically of like, am I still kind of with it as far as the trends? Am I still making things that satisfy the wider audience and not just me? I haven't missed the boat, all that kind of thing. And we were talking about that in terms of AI, specifically about stuff like ChatGPT and these sort of crazy revolutionary things that have been so accepted by the mass market very quickly. And she made the interesting point to me that was like, we're kind of probably the last generation that's going to Google things to get information, and like Googling things to get information. A younger generation is going to think of that as like something my out of touch grandma does,
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I kind of probably shouldn't admit to this, but I use ChatGPT for everything.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm like totally hooked on ChatGPT. There's a whole bunch of ethical stuff around OpenAI and ChatGPT that I'm not so happy about from what I understand, but it seems it's legal right now and I just can't help but fucking use it. So I'm using it, you know what I mean?
The AI thing in particular, I guess it's interesting. Well, maybe we should give people context for this before we really talk about how you came to be doing it. So Voice Swap, when did you launch? Fairly like a month ago or less at this point?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, man. And has it been, I know you were running around today, and I'm sure releasing it has just been a whirlwind of trying to get the word out and, all of that sort of thing, onboarding people, et cetera. Is there any parallel between releasing something like Voice Swap and, say, releasing a big album of yours in the past? Does it feel similar to like a rollout campaign?
I mean, all I can say is that personally, I love what I'm doing at the moment. And I don't know if you know about DogsOnAcid, if you heard about that.
Oh, I very much want to talk about DogsOnAcid. Yeah.
So I mean, I've always been, I don't know if geek is really the word. I mean, I am a geek as well, but there's something about internet platforms and applications that I just find creatively just absolutely fascinating. To me, it feels like, although I've always been fascinated with music is kind of one-dimensional. It's like a sonic thing. You listen to it. I mean, it's not one-dimensional because it's so many things, but the thing that's so cool about apps is that it can be visual, it can be audio, it can be psychological. It really feels like you can create an immersive world for people. And I'm not saying that I think that Voice Swap is particularly the most immersive platform, or that Dogs on Acid was, although in some ways it was quite immersive as a community platform.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I launched Dogs on Acid back in 2001, I think, you know, this was like before Facebook, before even MySpace. And we were the biggest online music community at the time. And I remember seeing the forums, like the global forum stats. We were like the number 24th biggest forum in the world, you know,
Wow.
back in like 2001. But the crazy thing was, like, at that point, it was just so amazing to be in this, to feel part of this community where drum and bass was kind of getting together. People were coming together from all over the world using the internet to be part of this discussion about drum and bass, and to be a sort of I don't know how you would describe that. So to be a conductor is probably not the right word, but to have such, like, you know, to be so blessed with having that sort of ability to be part of that platform and part of guiding that platform.
Yeah, it was like everyone came to the party and the party was at your house, you know?
It was amazing, man. You know, it was, for me, it was like the thing that I've enjoyed probably the most out of my music industry career altogether. And even though I've had like #1 records, and I remember sitting in like a cafe the day that my first #1 record went to #1 with my manager drinking a glass of champagne. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is obviously fucking cool, but I didn't feel as happy as I felt like when there were people on Dogs on Acid, like telling me that they loved Dogs on Acid. It just felt like, you know, you really sort of get this engagement, and it's like you're talking to people and you're like, what do you guys want? And they're like, well, we want this. And you're like, okay, leave it with me. And then you go off and, you know, make it happen. And that's kind of what we've been doing with Voice Swap. And it's just been very, very fulfilling. And I think, like, with an album, it's a much more personal thing, because you make this music. Some of it maybe goes off on the dance floor, and maybe other DJs or other people kind of buy into it, and it becomes part of their sort of thing as well. But it's such a personal thing. It almost feels like, you know, undressing and standing up in front of everybody and going, hey, what do you think about my cock?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's really, you know, it's terrifying as well. You know, it's a really terrifying thing to do. And I think, like, you know, any kind of creative endeavor that you put tons of energy into, like this, or like an album, or like anything, can be terrifying and also really rewarding. But I just feel like this is like an evolving thing. So that I was always interested with albums, and maybe we'll do this with the next one. And weirdly, I'm working on an album at the moment, if you can believe that it's possible to do that on top of all this other shit that we're doing right now. But I kind of really like the idea of creating an evolving album where you don't just like release the track. It's like you release version 0.0.1, and then like you get feedback. And, you know, I really love that idea. But the great thing about platforms is that they just do evolve by default.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, we're seeing plenty of examples of artists releasing an album and then, you know, uploading new versions or new mixes of certain songs, you know, after the release, that sort of thing. I think the idea of sort of what is an album, even that idea is evolving, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And it's definitely an area that I think we're going to see more change with. And my sort of antenna in the music industry is definitely telling me that is where things are going. You kind of hear, I mean, I talked to my label guys about it a few years ago when I started kind of making music again, because I stopped completely for a while. And I was really excited about that. And I was like, guys, you know, I really want to make like an album where, you know, we do version 0.1, and then, you know, maybe like I come back and I kind of change it slightly. And it's like when you follow this album, you know, you're sort of like buying into like an evolving journey, and you're part of the journey because you can feed back on it and know that your comments are being read maybe, and you're kind of part of this evolving thing. And the guys at my label, bless, because they are great people generally, but like I think they were, when I was trying to explain this to them, they were just completely terrified. They're like, Dan, you can't, like, that would be impossible. Like, trying to sort of like figure out how to do it within the confines of Spotify and Apple Music, and how do you do that on all the different platforms at the same time? You know, maybe that could be maybe there's a new platform. Maybe someone actually has already made a platform that does that. I've got a feeling there might be that already, but it's definitely, that's the kind of thing that excites me about creating, for sure.
It makes sense. Well, you know, because as producers, and I think probably listeners know this to a certain extent anyway at this point in electronic music, of, you know, once a song gets to release, you've already probably got 10 versions of that song sitting on your hard drive anyway, right? The way a song goes from first idea to finished product can be this long, circuitous route. I mean, so I'm going to put a pin in Dogs on Acid and Voice Swap. I'm going to come back to both of those. But just while we're talking about this idea, I had actually written down that you've always had in your music career this really interesting thing with the original and the remix. I think you've had a few different songs where there's been this interesting relationship between the original and the remix. And I'm thinking about songs like Gold Dust that then had this Flux Pavilion remix that sort of became huge in a different arena and became very influential, even historically now, to a whole genre. A song like Bang Bang, that, you know, the original of that is sort of, I don't know if you'd say like a lighter, but, you know, it's this poppy kind of groovy tune. And then the remixes on there was the Rennie LaVice remix that's, you know, a crazy D&B smasher kind of thing that it seems like you've been very good. And I don't know if this is intentional, of sort of being able to make a song and then reframe the context of that song through, you know, remixes, that sort of thing. Which, you know, not that you invented remixing your songs, but I think, I don't know. Do you know what I mean when I say, I think for you, there's that relationship has always sort of existed and been significant in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really get a kick from like showcasing other artists. And this kind of feeds actually back into all the other things that I've done outside of music as well. But I get very excited about some people, you know, and I feel like the world needs to know about them. And the tiny thing that I can sometimes do is like approach them and be like, dude, I think you're so amazing. Can you please remix this thing? And like with Flux Pavilion, I remember when I'd heard it was weird, man. I was late on dubstep, and I remember a lot of the drum and bass guys used to play that Benga and Koki track Night. It was like this thing where, because back at that point, nobody would ever play anything that wasn't drum and bass in a drum and bass set. It was almost like illegal to do that. Like people would be like, are you fucking crazy? What are you doing? Do you know what I mean? And like all of a sudden, everybody was playing this Benga and Koki track. And I thought it was dope. But I remember watching these sets and being like, oh man, like, why are we not promoting our own genre? Like, why is everybody jumping on this like other bandwagon? And that was kind of, at the beginning, that was kind of my reaction to it. But when I heard Flux Pavilion and I heard like maybe his first couple of releases, I was just like, oh my God, this guy has made me interested in dubstep, because what he's doing at that tempo is exactly what I love about drum and bass. But now I'm hearing it in a way that I've never heard it before. It's all like, you know, because the whole thing about tempo is that it's quite restrictive. You know, if drum and bass is all you make, you always work at the same tempo. Your palette is kind of limited. So to hear like the palette that I loved at that tempo was so inspiring. And that kind of encouraged me to make Louder, which obviously was like the first drum and bass #1 in the UK. You know, so that was a massive thing for me. And it was so weird because I've not been that supportive of dubstep early on until I heard this style of dubstep that I'd imagine Scream probably fucking hates. Like it was like, you know, it wasn't like the most uber cool style of dubstep. Like all of that kind of, I'm trying to remember some of the names of the early guys that did this.
I was just talking to Scuba, if you know Scuba, about sort of the early days and where it went from there. And I think he had definitely some conflicted feelings about it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember people being, and I can't remember any names now, maybe because I really am getting old. My memory is just terrible. But I remember speaking to some of the very respected early dubstep pioneers, you know, like Hatcher, for example. You know, though Hatcher played quite a jump up sound as well. But some of the guys that weren't so jump uppy, I felt were quite, they didn't really like the more Flux Pavilion-y circus kind of sound that started to emerge. It was kind of seen as being, you know, not so deep and soulful. But dude, I fucking love that shit. I was like, this is dope. You know, all of a sudden I wanted to be playing it in my sets because I'm like, this fits with the other music I'm playing. It's just slightly slower, but it's the same energy, and I can use it to kind of just, you know, slow my set down for a second and then take it back up again, you know. And so anyway, it's completely diverse. But when I heard Flux Pavilion, you know, I felt honored for him to agree to do that remix because I was such a fan immediately. And that's the way that I feel about all musicians. Whenever I hear a track, it doesn't matter if anybody fucking knows who they are. If I think if it blows my mind, I'm instantly like, feel not worthy. Do you know what I mean? And I'll be like tapping them up, and I'm like, I know you've only got like 7 followers, but would you please do this? You know, like it's just me, DJ Fresh. You know, but if it's okay, like, you know. So I think, you know, that's a really great thing to have about having a platform as a musician, is the ability to shine a light on other things, and that's always what I've tried to do with my remixes. And then on top of that, the other thing is that I'm terrible at doing remixes. I think because I don't really have like a set formula. Like my songs always tend to be based around a very, you know, really clear inspiration that I've got like for a specific track, which doesn't happen that often. I can't just apply that to other people's music, you know, whereas there are some artists out there that are very stylized and they have a very specific, very cool often formula that is really particular to them. And they can kind of just take any track and be like, right, let me just put my stamp on that. And you're like, wow, that's dope. That sounds like, you know, whoever. So I never really had that as well. So I kind of look at remixes as being very much like a kind of reimagining of my idea, basically. Yeah.
Sure. And that makes total sense. I mean, it makes me curious, you know, because obviously you have such a crazy pedigree in drum and bass going, you know, way back to Bad Company and, you know, all of these sort of legendary institutions. Did you get any pushback when you started to diversify your own sound?
Yeah, just slightly. Yeah, I'm still getting it almost every fucking time that I do anything. And it's like, I mean, I released a track, quite an underground track last week, and I was on YouTube and I was looking at one of the comments, and somebody was like, oh, this feels like it needs a remix. Or like, it feels like it needed to be and I was reading this comment and I'm like, oh man, like, really? Like, I don't know, like it definitely really gets to me because I really care about what I do. And I'm, you know, in my own way, an absolute perfectionist. And we did get a lot of pushback with Bad Company, but personally, like my whole thing is always what gets me out of bed about music, technology, anything, is trying to shape the future, you know, trying to be part of shaping the future and trying to do new things that haven't been done before. And I'm not saying that I think I succeed at doing that, but that's what I'm trying to do. And for me to just keep doing the same thing over and over again is almost like the equivalent of going to hell. Like it drives me fucking crazy. So as much as I loved making the Bad Company stuff, I think for us, when we got to the point where you couldn't really get away with using hardware anymore because it was the timing was not tight enough, and it was hard to mix it as well as, you know, the stuff that was going on next. It just kind of, that really spelt the end of that period of Bad Company stuff, because I couldn't sort of evolve what I was doing with that equipment anymore. And yeah, I don't know, man, you know, like I often think back, you know, I got my old Bad Company sampler fixed recently, and
nice.
Had it all, like all the knobs repaired and everything. And this was actually about a year and a half ago, and I put it in the studio. Was really, really excited about like trying to just transport my mind back to that place and see if there are any more ideas left, you know, that come from that equipment. But then I sat down and started kind of playing with it, and I was like, yeah, this is really fucking cool, but I just know that I can't get it sounding like the way that I get my stuff sounding now. And
yeah,
I don't know, man, I just think, you know, it's like if we just kept making the same thing over and over again. I get that people are like, you know, oh, why did you stop making this, or why does this sound different, or whatever. But I genuinely think that if we kept doing that thing, they would have just got fucking bored anyway. They might not admit that to themselves.
Oh, of course. I mean? Yeah. Well, and you have to, I mean, that I think for anyone who makes a name, or anyone whose work we remember in art, kind of in anything, there's always sort of this sixth sense of when to move on, because I think with any great idea, you can cling to it too long, and then it starts to decline because you start closing yourself off to other new ideas, right? And so I think there really is, and I certainly think with your career, you've had that of kind of just always keeping it moving at many points when I think a lot of people would have said, all right, this is pretty good. You know, I think I can kind of just ride this out.
Well, you know what? It's funny because you just reminded me of a story that I often think about, something that happened to me right at the beginning when I first started. I signed to this label, Renegade Hardware, which at the time was like a really fucking, I mean, it still is, sorry.
Legendary label, yeah.
The legendary label, but you know, at that moment in time, it was like this kind of up and coming, super cool label, and Future Forces, who then became part of Bad Company, were like the coolest fucking thing. You know, I was like 17 or something, and I was tiny. I've always been, I was a really tiny kid. Like I was skinny and tiny, and you know, like this tiny little dude. And you know, I kind of walked into this situation where there were all these super kind of experienced, very credible guys in the drum and bass scene, and I was like this little kind of kid, like, hey, you know. And we went out to a restaurant, and I just made a track called The Code with the guys that then became Bad Company, and it was the first track that I'd done where like everyone was, you know, all the people we looked up to, like Andy C and Randall and Ed Rush and Groove Rider, and they were all playing this track. And it was a pretty amazing moment, like for me and for us. You know, I'd never had that experience at that point. And I was out with a guy who, I won't say who it was, but at the time he was quite a big name in drum and bass, and he was a bit older than me. And he said to me, he was like, so Dan, you know, now that you've made The Code, actually, I've got a feeling he might have said this about The Nine, not The Code. But anyway, The Nine was the next track.
Yeah,
so
and that was the one that kind of became the legendary track. Yeah,
I think it was The Code though. But he said to me, now that you've made X, how are you going to aren't you worried about how you're going to follow that up? And at the time, I felt like I was actually, you know, I wasn't angry at him. I didn't get angry with him, but I felt quite kind of, that really scared the shit out of me. You know, it was like somebody sticking a dagger into you, you know, and I really felt terrified. I was like, fuck, you know, like, how am I he's right, you know? And then I thought to myself, the thing is, like, I could worry about that, and I can try and come up with the thing that's going to be bigger than The Nine or bigger than whatever it was. But if I start thinking that way, I'm pretty sure that I'm never gonna make that track, because when I made that track, I wasn't thinking, how could I make anything? I was just fucking having fun
Of course.
We had like an idea about what we were going to do, and we went and we did it. But it came from a place of like exploration and freedom, not a place of being constricted and, like I have to copy this thing and keep that formula the same and use the same snare drum and whatever. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, you know what, I'm never going to fucking try ever again to try and make a better track than the last one. That's how I'm going to react to what this guy said to me. And then we made The Pulse, which got signed to Groove Riders label, which became one of our biggest tracks at the time. And it just felt like basically as long as we just had fun in the studio and kept thinking forwards, instead of worrying about trying to replicate what we'd already done, that everything just seemed to kind of go really well, So I think that was kind of what got me started on the path of just continuously forging forward.
Getting scared early on that way. I mean, it makes total sense. It's hearing you tell that story, I can relate because I've certainly had moments like that myself. And I think it's a pressure any creative person can relate to. It's almost like this loss of innocence moment. Like it makes me think about, like kids playing, it's like the most innocent, pure time of your life. And I was reading something about how kind of the relationship we want kids to have with screens and phones and all this sort of thing. And that, a lot of parents now, every moment of their kids' youth is like recorded on a phone, and that they're trying to figure out there's sort of a moment when an innocent kid starts becoming aware of the fact that they're being perceived and they're being recorded. And that, they become aware of how other people are perceiving them. And your story kind of reminded me of that, of like, I think it's true for artists too. You really want to try to keep that innocence as long as you can. And then when you have that moment, whatever that moment is, it's awesome that you could sort of make that decision so early on. Because I think a lot of kids early in their career, that's a hard thing to understand, that like, oh, this scary moment, I don't have to feel insecure. I don't have to sort of follow this person's expectations. In fact, it will benefit me to do the opposite,
I mean, dude, maybe I just got fucking lucky. Maybe it didn't matter what I thought. I don't know. But I remember being terrified about that. And it really stuck with me for a while. But what was really empowering was not so long after that, maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, when things were going well. And I think back to that conversation and think actually what that kind of goes to show is that the way to succeed is to just believe in what you're doing and not fucking listen to anybody else.
You have to. I think it's the only way. It's a thing I talk about a lot on this podcast. A lot of producers listen to this, and people who are trying to get into the music industry and that sort of thing. And, there's the classic question, what do I have to do? What's the secret? Blah, blah, blah. And for me, I always just want to break that down, that there's never a secret. If there is a secret, you just said it. That's kind of the only solution, is do what you think is cool. And really, as much as you can, try to not get pulled off or, distracted. And whether it works for you or not, it's still kind of the only path, in my opinion.
And it's also the other thing that I think happens in people's careers, at least in dance music, which is really interesting, is that if you're lucky enough to kind of blow, and you become the thing for a minute, which happened for us fairly early on with Bad Company. It was like, there was definitely a moment where within drum and bass, a lot of people were like, Bad Company, we used to go and do these shows and people were like holding fucking T-shirts up in the air and album covers. And there was just like hysteria, and it was really cool to witness that. But the inevitable thing is what goes up must come down. And no matter how fucking, even when you look at like bands that have smashed it got massive fan bases like Metallica or whatever, there are always periods where they were like in the charts or at their peak in terms of, commercial interest or whatever. And you can't be at that point all the time. And when somebody else is coming through when you inevitably lose that limelight, you're no longer the new kid that everybody's talking about. And then the next guy is coming through. How you deal with that, I think, is really, really important as well. Because if you basically go, fuck, I need to copy what they're doing, you're finished.
Yeah.
It's literally that simple. Like if you decide that the way you react is like, I'm going to change what I'm doing and try and copy this other person, it's just game over. But it's hard in something like drum and bass. It's so technical. I mean, a lot of dance music now, a lot of EDM style genres are very technical now. But back in those days, it stood out as being particularly technical drum and bass. And I think especially when music is technical, it's very challenging because there's partly a drive to technically move forward and partly a drive to move forward in terms of what people are excited about and what's current, stylistically. So it can be quite hard separating those two things and maybe going, well, somebody's come up with this really cool way of doing a snare that I never thought about before. Maybe that can inspire me to do what I do, but in a new way.
Right.
And that can work really well. Like you have to give dues to the guy that came up with this new snare technique, and it's okay to for that to influence you, because that's how we work in music. We're all influenced. But if the way that you're influenced is to literally kind of not listen to your heart and not follow what you believe musically, and try and change what you're doing completely, I think that's kind of when, unfortunately, a lot of people fall by the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like I've talked about this before. I mean, I can relate to when that happens to people, because I think we've all had moments where you momentarily lose direction or you're not sure of what the next step should be. And then that seems like an easy answer of like, oh, well, this is working, so, maybe I can try this. But I think just like anything else in life, it's like a fear-based response to do that. And anytime we're making fear-based decisions creatively, it's almost 100% a bad choice,
Yeah, I totally agree, man. It's crazy because the new album that I'm doing is kind of a crazy story, but the first track on the album, we were on holiday after COVID, and we went to Thailand, and I'm actually moving to Thailand at the moment.
Wow.
Which is quite exciting.
That's how do you feel about that? That's a big move.
Super fucking excited. So we went out just after it had opened up again after COVID, and it was like literally days after it had opened up, and we went with our little daughter, who was 1 year old at the time. That was super cute. But we had to do the quarantine thing in the hotel for a couple of days at the beginning. And I was in the hotel and I could hear something in my head. And maybe it was like some kind of twinkling of bells or something out on the streets of Bangkok when we'd driven past in a tuk-tuk or something like that. But I could hear this thing in my head and it sounded really beautiful. And I thought, I wonder if I can. It sounded like the kind of thing that you needed to sample. And even if you tried to sample it, it would never sound quite the same as like you heard it.
Yeah.
But because I was in isolation for 2 days and I had nothing else to do apart from listen to my screaming 1-year-old and try and play with her until she went to sleep, I basically decided to try and remake this riff. And I had my work laptop, which didn't even have, it just had like the most basic Ableton with the basic plugins, no other plugins, whatever. And so it was like mission impossible, but I tried to kind of start recreating this melody. And I managed to kind of recreate it, and I was amazed that I managed to do it. And I was listening back to it and I was like, fuck, that's crazy. That's like what I was hearing. I managed to kind of resynthesize it pretty much. I'm not actually amazing at synthesis anyway, to be honest. It's not my strong point. But so I managed to get this thing going. And then I went back to England 2 months later and I listened to what I'd made, and I was like, wow, that sounds like the way I feel when I'm in Thailand. And I was like, okay, so now what do I do? Because I had like this is like a melody, and I was like, so what do I do with this? And I was I only do a few gigs a year now, and I had like my sort of little run of gigs coming up.
Right.
And I thought, well, like, I could do this with it, like listening to other people's stuff. Maybe I could do this kind of thing, or maybe I could do whatever. And somehow, like, it just didn't. I tried like one or two things, and it just didn't sound right for the sort of it didn't sound right for outside of Thailand. Like, it just sounded like it wouldn't fit anywhere,
Sure.
And so anyway, so I kind of forgot about it. And then I went back to Thailand at the beginning of this year, and we were on the ferry on the way to this really beautiful island called Koh Phi Phi, which is like one of the most beautiful islands in Thailand. And we were on this ferry basically with all these other people, with my little daughter and my wife, and they were like downstairs in the ferry, and I went upstairs and sat on the top deck, and it's like this incredible, beautiful ocean around Koh Phi Phi and the islands rolling up in the distance. And I thought, oh, fuck, that. I remember that track that I started like last year that I haven't listened to since, for like a year or whatever.
Yeah.
And I put the headphones on and hit play. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the most amazing thing. It's like, this is my version of like what Thailand feels like to me.
Wow.
Like, it was like the perfect soundtrack. And so I started kind of like adding these beats and did all this kind of stuff and whatever. And it, like, this track is kind of like, I can't wait for people to hear it, because, you can't really, everybody feels differently about things, but I'm like so excited about it. And it kind of basically caused me to start writing this album that I've now written fucking 10 tracks somehow over the last year. I was so excited about this new idea that I'd had. And the idea was a really personal one, which relates to what we're talking about. The idea was, I'm going to basically allow myself to accept that when I listen to other people's music in the genre, and I think that my idea doesn't fit in, I'm just going to ignore it, and I'm just going to carry on making it because it feels right to me. And I don't know whether, I feel like this album is probably going to be a fucking disaster, like commercially and shit. And it probably will be the last fucking album that I will make. But one thing that I know is that I personally absolutely love what I'm doing with it, and I feel so amped about working on it and finishing it. And to me, that's kind of like the purest version of what we're talking about. Like, you don't know whether something's going to do well or whether people are going to like it, but as long as you fucking love it and you're excited about it, I feel like that's the baseline. Because basically, if it's coming from a place of like, how do I tick this box? What do people want? Like, is this okay? Should I use this beat? Oh, maybe I should use this beat, because that, when you start overthinking shit, that's not what I think. That's not what the magic of music is about. The magic of music is, I think, about something very personal and something magical. It's not like something you can write down in a formula.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about something you said earlier in this conversation, which is the idea that when you had a #1 hit record and you're drinking champagne and you're at the top of the charts, that while that was a nice moment for you, it didn't feel as impactful as creating an online forum where other DJs and producers could just come and hang out. And I think we're kind of talking about the same thing here, where it's, whether or not this new album is a commercial success kind of isn't the point. And I'm only making that and like driving that point home because I think it's important for anyone listening to understand that, like, it's so easy, I think, especially in the age of social media, for DJs and producers and musicians to get obsessed with sort of the flashier parts of success, whether that is having a #1 album or playing the biggest festival in the world, or, whatever the idea of like the ultimate success is, when really at the end of the day, when you look back on it, those probably aren't the parts you're going to think about the most, you know?
Yeah. I mean, having said that, like there are a couple of memories that do.
Yeah, no, of course, they're all good.
Yeah.
And I don't, of course, I am not trying to minimize any of those accomplishments, but yeah, I don't know.
No,
For
I
me,
see for everyone, but it's crazy. Like you watch, like, I don't know, DJ Snake. I always, whenever I see DJ Snake's Instagram, I'm just like, what kind of life is this guy living? I've never seen anything like it. It's just fucking crazy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm sure, that must be fucking amazing. Be really cool to kind of experience being DJ Snake. But personally, I found the things that have been most gratifying have been it's kind of like a personal thing. Like when you listen back to this piece of music and you're just like, I can't believe I made this. It brings me these crazy feelings. And, like my favorite tracks that I've made are not the ones that have been the most successful. They're often ones that people don't even really know. And I think that's the same for a lot of artists.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think for a lot of artists too. I don't know if it was this way for you. Like take your hits, like take something like Gold Dust or Louder or any of those. When you made tracks like those, did you know at the time, or did they feel any different from other songs? Because I think oftentimes you'll hear producers say that, they were surprised when that song became the hit, or when people gravitated towards that song. Like it's hard to predict sometimes.
Yeah, I remember, so when I did Gold Dust, it's funny because a few of the bigger ones that I've done, like I write a lot of my own hooks, and the same with Tarantula, with Pendulum. I wrote that, Black Tarantula thing, and had to sing that to Spider, which was a interesting experience. He was like this really big, fucking scary looking dude, and I'm like, yeah. So what do you think about singing like this? And then he sings it back, and he's like, Black, and it sounds really fucking cool. But so that sort of thing is an interesting aspect of the vocal tracks that I've written, because I'll often I'll get an idea for a hook, and I know that when there's someone who can actually sings it back to me, that's when I know whether what I'm hearing in my head is going to work. Because sometimes you write a hook and you sing it to a singer and they sing it back, and you're like, something about that just doesn't like mean anything. It just kind of just sort of like rolls over you and just feels sort of weak. And then other times, that like when Naomi sang the Gold Dust hook back for the first time, and you're like, fuck, that sounds really cool. And I remember, like, when we did Gold Dust, I said to her, because the way I was hearing it in my head was with all these harmonies, and I sang her the hook, and then I sang her all of the harmonies individually, like sang her, the notes to her. And she was kind of like, I don't think she generally, if you listen to a lot of Miss Dynamite's tracks up to that point, like I'm sure she used harmonies here and there, but that sort of type of harmony stacking, I don't think was something that she did often in her tracks. And I remember her kind of looking at me like okay, you want me to, okay, all right, I'll try that. But then when we heard it all compressed back together, it's something about that hook just sounded alive, and it was, that was, you could kind of tell there was something special there. Like you could, when you heard Spider sing the Tarantula hook back, I mean, in terms of how well something's going to do, I think a lot of the time, a lot of that is to do with timing and, just the temperature of where you are, where music is, where people are with what they are excited about. And, I think there's every producer's that I often think there's so many fucking amazing songs out there that nobody's heard, that are probably the greatest songs that mankind has ever made, are probably buried somewhere in Spotify.
Yeah, they have 10 plays on Spotify. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I don't know, it's whether something is a hit, whether it's good, I think are two different things. But there's definitely a moment that you get, like we had with the 9. I remember with Jason Maldini when we made the 9, And we were quite drunk. This was like back when I used to drink, and we were like, we'd go in the studio and like get quite drunk and like make tracks.
Yep.
And we were listening back to the 9, and I remember sort of looking at Jay and being like, I kind of have a feeling that this one's like a bit special. And he's like, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what it is. It just feels, because it's really simple, but it feels kind of like special somehow. And then obviously, like, 3-4 years later, Drum and Bass Arena are like the greatest drum and bass track of all time and all that kind of stuff. So I think you can kind of feel, it's like these moments that have a special, certainly a very exciting feeling to them. But then to be honest, there's also been plenty of times when I've been really excited about a moment in the studio and then it's just led absolutely nowhere. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's hard to predict. One thing I'm taking out of what you're saying about all of those stories, especially, sort of singing the hook to the vocalist and having them sing it back to you and you sort of perceiving it differently, it makes me think about voice swap again, where it's sort of that idea of seeing your idea reflected back at you can almost, change the way you think about your own work. And that, I think, is really powerful. And I always feel bad sort of making people explain the thing they've explained a lot already. So for people who don't know, let me try to explain what I think voice swap is. And if I'm wrong, you just correct me. Basically, I mean, this new platform you've got out there where singers can upload samples of them singing, like long, samples that you can train AI on. So, we're talking like half an hour of them singing. And then producers who want to work with vocalists on their tracks, but maybe don't have any connections or don't know where to start with that sort of thing, can come up with their own melodies, like you were talking about for Gold Dust and Tarantula and these sorts of things. And more or less have the AI version of these singers replicate the hooks that they've written, at which point, once they have a product and if they're excited about it, it's unlike something like Splice, where you just yank the samples and you own them. This is more of a back and forth with the vocalist. You go to them, you say, hey, I made this with this thing that was trained on your voice, and I'd like to put it out. Can we sort of jointly come to an agreement on this? Is that about right? Yeah, absolutely. And I think like we just kind of, I think, almost uncovered not being able to sing the things that you can hear in your head is almost kind of like a handicap, Yeah. I mean, as a musician, it's very frustrating to have these ideas in your head and to not be able to hear them the way that you hear them in your head, but B, equally importantly, not to be able to convey them to the people that you're working with. And if you're like a really successful producer and you've got a lot of gravitas and people will listen to you, even though you can't sing, you can walk it. I'd imagine Max Martin can sing, but like, if you walk into a room, people give you the benefit of the doubt and they'll sing the hook back. Someone who's got an amazing voice, when they sing the hook that you've got in your head and you can't sing, it literally sounds so different. It's like night and day. Yeah. And I've had situations, like I said, where, I've sung something to somebody and I've seen them looking at me. And I think this happened with Hot Right Now, with the hook on Hot Right Now. And I've seen somebody looking at me. This wasn't actually Rita, because Rita sung the song after it was written, but they're looking at you like, really? Because like your voice sounds so awful and so unconvincing. Yeah. That like they're almost just doing it because they feel bad for you. Do you know what I mean? They're gonna like sing it back. They're kind of expecting that when they sing it back, it will confirm that it's a bad idea. And then they sing it back, and because they've got an amazing voice, everybody in the room is like, fuck, that's amazing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And obviously it's really amazing as a songwriter, singer, producer, whatever, to
to witness that and to be part of that. But what it also uncovers is how many amazing songs are there that nobody gets to hear because the people that have the idea don't have the vocal talent to be able to present it in a way that people, can understand. And so for me, I mean, there's a whole thing I'll go into about the ethics of AI, which is equally important in terms of what we're trying to do with voice swap. But the thing that I'm most excited about is how I know that so many of my producer friends that I know, some of them can actually sing quite well, but I know that they write stuff. They write melodies, they sometimes write hooks. They sometimes work with other singers. For those guys to be able to just be like, okay, here's my idea. Let me hear it in an amazing sort of Liam Bailey male voice, or let me hear it like in a female voice, actually, or let me hear it in like a really crazy, intense dance, like diva voice, like Angie Brown. That it's going to be literally that easy for them to just go pick the voice, upload, okay, fuck, yeah, pretty cool, yeah, and then what we're doing actually this week, we're about to release, we've come up with like what I believe is the first ever system like this. So we've got, well, for this particular technology, so we're going to bring out this push button licensing system where basically the artists are agreeing to a very reasonable payment for use of their AI voice on tracks. So it won't be that much more expensive than paying, for a splice sample or whatever.
Sure.
But then what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to like create this recording, try out like all these different voices, find the one that sounds amazing. And then if you want to use it, you can click a button, you can pay for it, you get a license, you can release it. And that, I think, is going to be game changing. I know certainly for me, it would be game changing as a producer. But as you say, like we're also creating a platform where people can also communicate. Like as we've established, I have this very community focused thing in everything that I do. And we want to build that out as well and focus more on how do we create a community of artists and producers. And part of that initially is going to be, okay, I've used your AI voice, but it sounds pretty cool. It makes me know that if you were to sing it,
right,
I'd have a smash on my hands. So like, can we do something? Because a lot of these producers and a lot of these singers aren't in contact with each other, and it's really hard to get in contact with a lot of these people.
Of course.
And so voice swap is also a way for producers to be able to reach easily into the worlds of all of these amazing singers and collaborate with them.
I love that, man. And it makes me think about sort of the bygone SoundCloud era too, which in conversations I have with so many different people, it always comes up that that's something that a lot of people feel like is missing, is sort of that social aspect, that community aspect, where, as opposed to something like Spotify, where people sort of feel like it has to be this polished product and you just put it up there and there's no feedback and it's kind of just exists somewhere out in the ether. What was great about something like SoundCloud was that it really did feel like a community. People were posting up drafts and other people were commenting on it. And it was sort of this fun back and forth. And yeah, if you can achieve sort of anything like that vibe, man, I think so many people out there are missing that right now.
Just out of interest, what is it that you think's been lost in that way by SoundCloud? I'm really interested to hear that. It's really interesting.
So I guess what I would say, and I'm sure a lot of people would have different opinions, but to me, it's sort of there was a community aspect of it that I think has been lost in the modern sort of streaming paradigm. Like there's not really a place where you put stuff up and people comment on it and then they say, hey, this reminds me of that. And you click through and there's another link to some producer you've never met. Like when you were talking about connecting people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access each other, I think that's something SoundCloud used to do really well. And I would also say there's sort of a...
Sorry for getting...
No, please.
It's like the product manager in me. I'm like...
No, please. I love this conversation. Anything, yeah.
But like, do you think that functionality of SoundCloud has gone, or is it just that the focus of SoundCloud has changed?
I would say the prevailing opinion of me and a lot of people I talk to about this is that SoundCloud got really big and sort of got ruined in that growth because the sort of repost system on SoundCloud got really out of control. All of a sudden, what used to be a way to sort of highlight something you thought was cool, like DJ management groups were forming these repost groups, and everybody's feeds were getting clogged by the same tracks appearing a million times. And you sort of stopped being able to curate what you were seeing on the platform. So that was number one. Number two, and this is sort of unavoidable, but for a long time, SoundCloud was the Wild West where you could post unauthorized bootlegs or drafts of things, random little ideas, fun little mashups or edits, that sort of thing. And of course, eventually they had to sort of shut that down because they worked with the major labels and they were going to get sued and all that sort of thing. But that sort of Wild West aspect is another thing that I think is very sorely missed in the DJ and producer community.
Yeah, that is really, really fascinating. And I mean, I don't know if this is good timing, but I quite like to sort of go through what I've been doing for the last 5 years, because I feel like it kind of explains a lot about why I'm doing what I'm doing. But
I would love to. Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about that period too. I mean, maybe the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you talk, is that when you were sort of talking about the bad company thing and expectations on a project once it starts to become successful, the moment where someone asked you, how are you going to follow up this thing? And you sort of made this decision to follow the beat of your own drum, so to speak. Was there a point later on, once you were commercially successful, you had all these number ones? I was going back looking at some old interviews, and it seemed like at a certain point, maybe even parallel to like the growth of SoundCloud we were just talking about, where it seemed like you had gotten so successful and had all these achievements that it almost started to feel stifling in a way.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I mean, it's such a weird thing that I think I was kind of touching on that when I was saying about the drinking champagne after the number one moment. But I mean, I remember, because the problem is, right, and there's so many of these massive EDM artists out there, and obviously we know what happened to Avicii. So that side of things has been highlighted before through his story. And I don't really know, I'm friends with some of those guys, or I've crossed paths with them a lot. I've been on tour with them, that kind of thing. And I know that some of those guys, without naming them, have managed to consistently be in that level of spotlight globally for many, many years. And obviously, some people can obviously handle that, or it brings them fulfillment. I don't know. But for me personally, I found that incredibly difficult. And because I think because I'm always wanting to do something new, it's like you kind of, as you're getting bigger, you're getting more and more of a sort of a team around you. The record label are prioritizing you. The American record label are starting to prioritize you. Agents are prioritizing you. Management teams are growing, all of that kind of stuff. And before you know it, you're basically supporting this whole sort of group of people. I mean, I had like this band on the road with me of like 15 people. And I remember being in the band on the road, and you kind of like, people would be like, so, are we going to do more shows this year? And you're like, well, yeah, but, I kind of want to see my girlfriend, and, I
right.
What I mean?
Right.
It's
but then, of course, you're a company at that point. So people are sort of, you feel a responsibility to your employees, quote unquote, right?
But, like I was saying, for me personally, as I've kind of explained, the joy of music is the undiscovered.
Yeah.
It's the undiscovered territory. That's what I love about it. And when you have a team of people around you the emphasis is to try to make you do the same thing over and over again, which is have hit records, you know. And I remember my A&R, who I'm very good friends with, and is actually now a very important person in the music industry. It's really successful, and he's amazing, and I've enjoyed working with him immensely. But I often felt like, you know, we'd be talking and he'd be like, you know, he'd call me up and he'd be joking, but he'd be like, come on, man, like, you know, so where's the next hit? You know, and I'd be like, yeah, you know, I've got like some stuff that I like, that's pretty cool. You know, I think maybe you might like this thing or whatever. But I just feel like that framework for me just wasn't really, it just didn't really bring out anything in me. It just made me feel confused.
Yeah.
And I kind of, on top of that, there were a lot of crazy things going on that I'd never really seen before to do with the way the music industry works. Like, for example, here in the UK, there are radio stations that book these enormous lineups of the top artists in the charts at that moment in time, and they don't pay them. They have them playing all over the place at these shows, and they literally say to them, you know, if you play at these shows, then we'll guarantee that we'll support your next single.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this crazy. I don't even know if I'm supposed to talk about this, but I promise you this.
I believe you. I mean, that's like the ultimate form of, you know, paying someone an exposure, right? Which is sort of the oldest scam in the industry.
Yeah. And, you know, and I remember there being a band, I can't remember which one, it might have been Kasabian, like some massive rock bands that got asked to play one of these things. And the story was that because they didn't want people to play live, because it's too difficult to have those artists come on and play one song in 5 minutes and then, you know, do the changeover. So they wanted everybody to mime. And I think it was Kasabian came on, and like they switched instruments or something, like deliberately to like fuck with them, because they like this. Yeah, the guitarist was like playing drums and the drummer was playing guitar. They're like a massive band, and they never got booked for any of those shows ever again. Wow. Arguably, that might have been the sort of why they kind of fell off a bit. And, you know, there's a lot of corruption, you know, in the music business. Unfortunately, it's like, it really is like the Wild West. It's kind of unregulated. Even the collection societies will tell you openly that they struggle to accurately sort of account for all of the royalties that are being collected all around the world. And weirdly enough, my father passed away a few weeks ago, and I was trying to trace down, he was in a band years and years ago, and I was trying to trace down the rest of the band members, and a friend of mine helped me find the band members, and he sent me these statements from one of the collection societies when my father's name was on this song, and I noticed that his name was completely incorrect, so they put like, you know, Peter Stein instead of Brian, and it was just so weird, because it was like I was in this thing of like very emotional things to do with my dad having died and trying to uncover like where the band are, and the first thing that I find is proof that he hadn't been paid correctly. Do you know what I mean? God, yeah. And the whole thing is a fucking mess, man. And I think, like, you know, back in about 2017, my label started saying to me, because Spotify was changing a bit, and they were saying to me, okay, so I think it was maybe the real explosion of streaming, like it went from downloads to streaming. And my label was saying to me, you know, we need like to be thinking globally now. Like when we're A&Ring your tracks, we need to pick the ones that have got global potential. Right. And I'm like, okay, you know, I understand what you're saying, but shouldn't we be picking the ones that are the best? Right. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, exactly. Isn't that what we should be doing? And it's like, well, yeah, of course they're the best. Yeah, they're the best ones, but they just need to be the best ones that also sound kind of like everything else, you know, in the world. Yeah. But, you know, and I'm not to be unfair. I mean, I had a really good experience with major labels, and I've been very lucky and worked with some really great people. And I don't blame them for the pressures of the music industry because it's not their fault. Unfortunately,
Sure,
it
of
just is
course.
the way that it works. But at the same time, what I started to realize was that I started looking at Spotify, and I started realizing that the way that the music industry was changing meant that what was more important than quality was effectively SEO in the guise of surfacing on these DSPs to do with the way that music sounded. I started looking at Spotify API, and I don't know if you know about Echo Nest. So there's an API that Spotify brought that they use to classify music by its characteristics, like how danceable it is,
right?
And how there's one that's quite funny. I think it's like how like they have vocalness is one of them. They're really weird, like adjectives
of
that
course.
You know that strange. But anyway, so Spotify makes this data available, and you can go and you can download and you can see how they classify all these tracks, you know, which I did. And I just thought, fuck, you know, it feels to me, and I understand it because these platforms are the increasingly large amount of music that's coming through, and they're trying to decide what to surface to people. And obviously you got to go for the lowest common denominator, because that's what the majority of people want. But the whole thing was becoming like a fucking equation, you know,
of course,
like
yeah.
it was turning into maths. And so I started thinking, you know, I've like really enjoyed what I did with DogsOnAcid. I had another platform that I started called Darkstar that was protecting copyrighted music on the peer-to-peer networks for a couple of years. We had some pretty big clients, we had some investment and stuff, and I've been involved in that. And I'd always kind of been doing some tech stuff on the side. And I just thought, I feel like the way that things are going, the part of me that makes music is not what can offer the world the most out of what I feel I have to give. I feel like now what I can do to put something positive out there into the world is to try and fight back on behalf of artists against this technology.
I mean, amen, man. And it's impressive. First of all, let me just say, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad, man. And that moment of finding out, you know, that he hadn't been paid is that's such a crazy moment to have while you're doing this thing that is intended to be more ethical in the music business. Like, the timing of that is insane.
Yeah, well, he was in a band. So back in the 70s, he was in this band, and they had one really big hit.
Okay.
And the singer of the band left to start a family, and he always kind of. I mean, he did really well himself. He went on and did it. It was a crazy story. My dad, he came from South Africa with literally nothing, and then started this really successful restaurant business, and was just an amazing person that achieved a lot of crazy shit against the odds. But he always used to say, like, you know, I really regret not having been able to follow music because of what happened with the singer in this band. And then when we were starting to do voice swap, and I was thinking, I wonder if I can, this woman who's probably going to die soon, because she's like my dad's age, she might be around for another few years, you know, maybe I can track her down, and maybe I can immortalize her voice, and maybe I can even make a new track with her and try and close this story.
Wow.
For my dad. So anyway, pretty deep shit.
That's amazing. Did you find her?
Not yet, but I'm getting closer, and I'm hoping that I'm going to find her, man. It's been like a process, and actually one of my friends gave me some information yesterday that was really helpful. Actually, we just added, like, one of the new artists we're adding to Voice Swap. So the whole thing with Voice Swap for me is kind of like about finding these really particularly interesting, amazing voices, which is like why we've got like Angie Brown, who, like, you know, a lot of people like these days might not know that she's like that sort of like really intense, overdriven house vocal on lots of these classic house tracks, you know. And those are the kinds of people that we're not just going after like whoever the hot sort of person that's in the top 10 right now is. We're going after like people that have these incredible, memorable voices. And somebody approached me like last week about a singer, and it was really weird because this was whilst this whole thing was going on with my dad. And somebody approached me and said, I work with this singer, I'm a manager, and the singer, her name's Mylene. She's this incredible singer that like you need to hear her voice. It's like mind blowing. She's like so talented, but she's had a kid, and she wants to be a nurse, and she just can't continue her music career. And she saw Voice Swap, and she was like, "Can you get my voice on Voice Swap? Because then maybe people can carry on making music with my voice, but because I just can't do it because I've got my kid and I need to do my job as a nurse." And it was really weird because I had this whole story going on in the background with my dad and trying to track down this singer who'd stopped because she'd decided to become a mum.
Right.
And I think like, there's been lots of things about Voice Swap that have been interesting to artists, and especially the ethical payment side and the protection, which I'd like to talk about. But like one of the things has been this immortalization aspect. And we've had a couple of people that have said, like a couple of singers that have said to me, my voice has changed over the last 10 years and I know it's changing. It's almost like kind of becoming like losing your sight or something, and they're like, I want to immortalize my voice. I want to put a bookmark on my voice the way that it sounds now.
Wow.
And I want that to like live forever. I want to be able to use that because my voice is changing. And we had like a library company that said the same thing to us last week about the singer they work with. They said, we'd love you to hear the singer, but it's a real shame because we've been working with her for 20 years. And 20 years ago, her voice was amazing. But unfortunately, like now it's not quite the same. It's kind of changed. So anyway, so we signed Mylene. It's basically the end of that story, and it wasn't.
I love that, man. It's such there's such a positive, just like optimistic angle to that story where there's plenty of people who sort of have a dream of a music career, but for any number of reasons get pulled away or distracted or overwhelmed or any of that. And it's such a cool idea that sort of you could put your voice on there and passively still have a shot at that dream while also, taking care of whatever you need to take care of. Like that to me is such a cool angle that I had not thought about.
I mean, it's kind of like, you've got somebody sort of trapped in a fucking little office somewhere and they never get to like go anywhere, and they're wearing this amazing pair of like mountain climbing boots, and then there's somebody that like can't afford a pair of mountain climbing boots and they all they want to do is climb a fucking mountain, and you take the mountain boots from this person and give them to this other person, and now this person can climb the mountain. And that's to me, that's what's so exciting about this technology. If it's used ethically and everybody gets paid and everything's protected, and those things are hard to do, and they're things I can talk about how we're doing them, and it's all really interesting. But
yeah, please do. I feel like we should dive into that a little bit, the ethics and your philosophy on it.
But overall, I think so just to kind of cover the AI ethical issues. So as I was saying, I kind of back in 2017, I had this, there's a word for it, but my vocabulary is just not good enough to remember what it is. But
that's fine.
I had this realization that, that actually I needed to stop doing music for a bit. And I'd had cancer, which I recovered from, but there was a few other things in the background going on that kind of led me to want to make a change.
Because you had also, not to cut you off, but I mean, the pace of your life before that also was sort of really hectic, right? And kind of, my impression of it sort of just like thinking about where you were at in your life was like, wow, that must have felt like a whirlwind at the time. And then with the frustrations with the industry, with the cancer scare, all of that, I can imagine even just personally, it must have felt like kind of just hitting a wall.
Yeah, it was actually the second time that I'd had not cancer, but I had a tumor some years before that and was very ill for a while, but I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was like there was one time where I was driving, this is crazy, I was driving on the flyover in Hammersmith in the middle of the night on the way back from a gig. There was a massive queue of cars and a really busy road in London, like full of cars. And I started feeling weird and I basically passed out behind the wheel of the car and woke up in this traffic jam with like all the cars beeping and the police sirens.
Oh, wow.
And I'd basically broken the clutch on the car. And it was kind of lucky that I'd broken the clutch on the car because the police rolled up and they were like, what's going on? And I'm like, I kind of came to and I was like, the clutch is broken.
yeah, just actually, in time to blame the clutch. Yeah,
just in time. But it turned out I had like something called an insulinoma, which is a really rare condition where you get very low blood sugar and it makes you kind of go a bit doolally. And I was suffering from this for quite a while. So then I had that operation, had that removed, and then I had cancer. And I think really, because I'm just telling you this simply because I basically lived my life at 1,000 miles an hour. And I didn't ever stop for anything. I would just keep fucking going, wouldn't sleep a lot. I was just, I partied a lot back in those days, and it was just an intense existence. And I felt like that everything that was going on around that period with obviously all of the pressure from record labels and just everybody to make hit records and all that kind of stuff and do shows was a lot of pressure. And so I probably just needed to put the brakes on as well. But luckily for me, there was this kind of underlying interest in tech and in building platforms and in solving technical problems. And as I said, I was kind of looking at the state of what was going on Spotify. And I was thinking, if this is like happening to me, and I've just had like a number one download 3 months ago or whatever it was at the time. And this was all like literally just after I released Gravity with Alarel. It was quite a big hit here. And if this is happening to me and I'm feeling pressure to like change the kind of music I'm making, and as we've established, I believe that that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Then what the fuck is this doing to the music industry? And what is this doing to all of the people that haven't been blessed like I have to have the opportunities that I've got? And I just felt like I know that I'm technical. I know I love writing code. I know that I can build platforms. Why don't I go and try and do something on behalf of like myself as a musician and my musician colleagues, And so it was really crazy. So I started down this rabbit hole. I started writing code again, wrote a couple of interesting little things. And then I was like, right, what do I do? And I went and joined a boot camp, like an intensive living boot camp for 3 months, where I lived in this house with other people that wanted to be coders as well. And like they were all from different backgrounds. Like one of them was a carpenter who'd never written code in their life. And it was a really crazy experience. It was like a live-in thing, a really intensive, like 3-month course I paid to do.
Did you get anyone looking at you, like figured out who you were? And they were like, what the fuck are you doing here?
On day one. So I'm like, I've rolled up there. I'm thinking, I've kept myself pretty in the background. I'm not in my videos, anything like that. So I'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
And then the first morning I walked in and there was a woman who was kind of doing breakfast for everybody. And she's like, oh, DJ Fresh, it's really great to meet you. and I'm like, oh man, this is gonna suck. Yeah. Like I've got 3 months. Everybody knows that I'm DJ Fresh. Nobody's gonna take me seriously. It's gonna be a fucking nightmare. But the crazy thing was, I was so into it. I was probably asking more questions than anybody else in the lessons. I was like up all night doing the exercises. I was reading books. Wow. I was just so engrossed in it. And then we got to the end of the course and they did like a work placement thing. And this still now seems to me just blows my mind. So I've always been like an entrepreneur. I've always had my own record labels, my own businesses, always done everything myself since I was like, 18. I'd never worked for anybody else before.
Yeah.
But they were kind of putting people into work placements. That was kind of the thing. Like, you finish the course and then they would sort of put you in front of employers and you would show them your project and, maybe you get hired. And so anyway, so I kind of got to the end of the course and I'm like, okay, now what? And I thought, well, this is completely fucking crazy. But what about if I go and get a job? Because if I go and get a job, then I can learn like properly on the job. I can have the real pressure of being in a tech company and really learn exactly how everything works. So I did that. I went and I got a job working for a company called HT2 Labs, like a learning education company in Oxford. And then I got promoted to machine learning engineer because they were trying to build a machine learning platform, and I built it in my free time because I still couldn't ever stop and kept going all through the night and all the rest of it. And I built this thing. They won some awards for it, and then the company got sold to a bigger company called Learning Pool, joined another company called GLG as a principal engineer in the AI team. And then now I'm head of engineering at a company that builds genetics, big data genetics pipelines. Wow. And dude, I fucking, I absolutely love it. It's like, it tickles my brain, like in the same way that music does. It's so fascinating. But the reason I've explained this whole thing to you is that now it feels like the time has come. And at the end of last year, I was approached by one of the very big generative AI companies. One of my friends is CTO at one of them. And I've been doing some consulting randomly for them, sort of attending some meetings and stuff. And I got off a pretty high-powered position at one of these very big generative AI companies. And when I kind of like dug into what was going on in terms of like where the data where it was coming from and what their position was on like copyright and whatever, I just felt really quite concerned. And at that point, I think my view of AI, which over the last 5 years had been working in science and working in education, was always about, I was working in groups of people that are very academic. It was really ironic because it's so different to how, my life had been for like the last 30 years. But I found that so interesting and fascinating. But everything was about validation. Everything was about ticking the boxes, data compliance, GDPR, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden I was noticing that the AI world that I'd been diligently working away towards understanding seemed to be like the fucking Wild West, and it seemed like these guys that were running these companies were basically just kind of just trying their luck and, seeing what they could get away with. That's kind of what it felt like. And I just thought there has to be a better way, like, because AI is not inherently a bad technology. It's just fucking maths. You know what I mean? And arguably it might be impossible to control. Nobody really understands like what the impact of AGI is going to be. And it is generally seen as being terrifying even by me. But I think this particular form of AI that we're experimenting with is very specific. We train a model on somebody's exact voice. And so all of the legal advice that we've had and all of the systems that we've created and the framework we've created for voice swap is based around the idea that if you train a model on somebody's voice, then the way that model is treated is exactly the same as that person's voice. Right. Why wouldn't it be? It's a fucking copy of this person's voice. But what's happening with generative AI is that people are saying, well, if you take 1 billion people or 100 million people and you kind of mix them all together, then surely it becomes it's not black and white anymore, is it? Because like, it's kind of a mess of like all of these things and you can't clarify what came from who. And I'm sorry, man, but that is a bullshit fucking argument. And if we don't close this down, this idea that that's okay, we're in serious fucking trouble. Do you know what I mean? And I just feel like as an artist, as a creative, and as somebody who has friends and a community in the artistic world, and especially now with my background in that world, I feel a responsibility to try and do something that goes again, to put up a signpost and go, hey, guess what, guys? There's another way to do this. You don't have to, we don't have to like throw away copyright law, because some of these companies are literally saying that they think the solution is to just overwrite all of copyright law. That basically we should just accept that the AI overlords are here and find a way to work with it. And then you say to them, okay, well, that's interesting. So you talk about universal basic income. You talk about none of us having to work again. Are you starting to pay everybody from your billions of dollars that you're making?
Yep.
No. Do you know what I mean? So I know that legislation is on the way. There's all these class action lawsuits happening. And I do believe that a brighter future is over the horizon. But voice swap is one tiny little seed in the ocean that I hope there's going to be other people like me that are going to come out and go, okay, it is a bit harder to do it this way, actually. But let's push a bit, let's work a bit fucking harder, because this is really important.
Man, I mean, amen. And it's funny. I was playing a show in Atlanta last weekend, and my Uber driver, I was having this conversation with her basically about just how crazy the world is getting in general right now, and how as an average person, it's very easy to just feel overwhelmed kind of in general with, climate change, the political divide, inflation not matching wage rising, everything is crazy. And what we sort of came to, you're reminding me of, where you can't worry about everything all the time or you'd go insane. And so to me, what makes more sense in a sustainable, but also sort of ethical model to live your life by is like, take care of your community, take care of the people around you as much as you can. In this case, I think we're talking about like DJs and producers and that sort of thing. And to me, man, that's like the most beautiful thing is you've built something for a community that you are a part of, that you understand how it works, you understand the needs of the people in those communities, and you contribute to it. And I don't know, man, it's beautiful. I mean, we don't have a union, right? So it's like we got to do something.
I mean, the thing is, man, it's like blockchain. There's a guy, Benji Rogers, right? Benji Rogers. So about 7 years ago, way before anyone was really talking about, I mean, people were talking a little bit about Bitcoin at that point, a little bit, but Benji did a talk at the PRS in the UK. And he was talking about how he thought blockchain could be the solution to the music industry's accounting problems. And I watched this speech and I was like, this is fucking amazing. I didn't even really at that point understand how blockchain worked.
Right.
I'm sort of smiling because I'm sort of thinking to myself, do I actually still understand how blockchain works? I think does anybody? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think I do.
lot of people who are blockchain enthusiasts, I would say, don't really understand.
It's an unfortunate thing, that for sure. But he was talking about, how it made everybody accountable. It made every transaction traceable in theory. And I thought, wow, that is a really amazing use of technology to solve one of the music industry's problems. And I know that there are people working on this, and it's something that I think is really interesting and important. But it's just one tiny piece of the puzzle. And, there's going to be so many pieces that need to be built. Yeah. But I think that the pieces that are going to be built, that are going to solve our music industry problem, are most likely to end up being built by people who understand what it's like to be a musician.
Yeah, I don't even know that I have that much more to add, but you're spot on that it's like, of course, I think it's easy to sort of look to other areas to like fix our problems. But then I don't know, I guess it's the same for like an artist. Eventually you get management and you're like, finally a team to help me deal with all these things. And then you end up finding out that like, well, no, still people can't like see inside of your brain. And so if you want things done the way you think they should be done, even if you have a team to help you, you still there's oversight, there's all these things. It's never the sort of magic solution that you want. And I think technology is very much the same way, that if we don't stay invested in it, And I say that, I'm not a coder, like I'm not the most technical guy, but I think it's very important for anyone who does what we do you have to stay on top of the emerging technologies, make sure, even if you're not using them, that you understand their implications and how they work and what they might mean for the future of what you do. Because otherwise, yeah, it's so easy to get taken advantage of, by somebody who doesn't understand the community.
It's kind of amazing. I know that I imagine you feel the same, although we haven't spoken about it. But from what you said, I kind of get the feeling that you might feel the same. But these days, like social media is so important, right? And a lot of artists don't necessarily want to really deal with social media. I'm definitely one of them.
Sure.
And that surely must mean that there's a whole load of amazing music that's not either getting made or not getting heard. And you think with all this technology, and it's like we're talking about, we're worried about AI that can like control the fucking world and destroy the planet and all this kind of crazy sci-fi shit. Like, why is the music industry making it so hard for amazing music to breathe? Like, just based on how great the music is, do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, and that's what I mean. I think like all of you look at like the platforms that we use, they're kind of been created by tech companies, that are not really, that they're not from a music background originally. And I think there's going to be some really exciting stuff on the horizon, man. I feel very positive about the future, actually. I feel like everything's happening at the moment with AI is a bit scary because people haven't been put in their place yet, and people haven't yet been sued, and the laws haven't yet been totally formalized. But I think there's good times coming, man. I think that things can get better, and I think they will get better. I was just going to say one thing about when we're talking about voice swap, just about you saying about community and stuff. Like, one of the things that I really love about what we're doing with voice swap is the feeling that I get from artists that we're effectively looking after on voice swap. I mean, it's almost like we're basically kind of almost like their AI voice managers now, and I'm talking to these guys like every day, and we've got groups, and I'm sending them messages, and they're all like, yeah, like go voice swap. It's like, it feels like a new community in itself. And it's such a great feeling as somebody who's a bit older in the music industry to feel like you're, kind of doing something to kind of like to help other people, and I think that's something that I really, really love about, not just voice swap, but just about the community and music in general. People are very, very supportive of each other. People want to champion each other's work. And I think when great platforms exist, they enable that to happen, and they empower positive things for the music community.
Yes, absolutely. And to tie that into what we were talking about earlier, you were asking me, what do people miss about SoundCloud? Exactly what you just said, I think, is a big part of that. I think that's a really big part of what people miss. And I mean, man, I'm having a great time talking to you. I don't want to keep you here all night because I know it's late there. Just last question before I'll wrap it up, to bring it back to Dogs on Acid for a second, because we're talking about these smaller communities. It occurred to me, I want to make sure that everyone listening knows what Dogs on Acid is. First of all, early forum where DJs and producers and just fans would meet up and talk about drum and bass music, which at the time was not the crazy big scene that it is now. And I wanted to ask you if you had ever talked to Wes, to Diplo, about Dogs on Acid, because he's someone, I've known him for like 15, 20 years. He's been on this podcast a few times. And the first time I ever met him was on the Holler board, which was sort of his version of Dogs on Acid. And it's where a lot of American DJs and some European as well were coming and talking about, the mashups we were excited about in that era of music. And it became, I think, similar to Dogs on Acid, this little mini community that then ended up, so many people came out of it to do such crazy things. And you've worked with him a bunch. I know you've known him for a long time as well. It was just an interesting parallel. I wonder if you ever talked to him about that.
I have no fucking idea about this. Like, I seriously, I've never even, I know this is awful, but I've never even heard of it before. What was it called?
That's crazy, man. Yeah, it was like, it was literally the exact same kind of thing as Dogs on Acid. So
what is it? What is it called?
It's called the Holler Board.
Oh, wait, hang on. Yeah, it kind of rings a bell. Okay.
So Diplo used to be in this duo called Hollertronics back when he was living in Philly. This was like before he was Diplo the way that anyone knows him. And yeah, he was in this DJ duo. They did sort of crazy mashups, which is how they got known. And they just had a message board called the Holler Board that kind of became the waypoint for everybody in that scene. You know, like each American city had its own little scene, and we would all go and play each other's little parties. And then we'd talk about it on the Holler Board and post our mashups and post little demos and that kind of thing. And it very much was the parallel for drum and bass and Dogs on Acid.
Well, I definitely will talk to him about it now. That's for sure. So thank you very much for telling me. I think maybe I might have heard of it and just not at the time known that he was involved, you know, that it was his thing. That's really interesting. But I mean, I love Wes, man. You know, I've always felt like the first time I met Wes, it was like backstage after a festival, and it was like pitch black, and one of these really big festivals where like if you're backstage, it's just like fucking mud everywhere. Yeah. And then like with these metal pathways, and I kind of ran into him and I was like, Diplo, and I'm like, it's DJ Fresh, and he's like, oh hey man, yeah, I like your music, like, you know, whatever. And we got chatting, and I've always really got on with Wes. He's smart, he's funny, obviously insanely talented, you know, and he's done so much for dance music, but I had no idea about that. So I'm really interested to bring that up with him next time I speak to him.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love to talk about it with you, man. And he, I think, parallels you too, where he's always sort of on to the next thing. You know, he's another one who's never really been resting on any kind of laurels. And I love the records you guys did too, man.
I've never worn cowboy hats though.
Well, maybe that's for the next album. That can be your look, you know.
Maybe. I think that might be because he's American. Like maybe if I was American, I would be wearing cowboy hats as well.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah, that's true. I guess because you're British, maybe there'd be some like Western culture appropriation issues. I don't know that anyone's ever gotten in trouble for appropriating cowboy hats, but well, man, before we get out of here, is there anything else? I could talk to you for hours, but is there anything else we haven't said that you want to get out there for right now?
I should probably just say I'm just going to do an advert for our platform for 2 seconds.
No, please.
So, yeah,
take all the time you want.
If you haven't checked it out yet, voiceswap.ai, that's voice-swap.ai. And we've got some amazing singers on there. And basically what you do is you upload your vocal and you can pick a singer, and then we use AI to basically change your vocal for the singer's vocal. And it's crazy because, as I was saying before, like I can't sing, but I can sing a little demo and I can get Nikki Ambers to sing it back, and it sounds amazing. So definitely worth checking out. We're doing, at the moment, we do like a 3-minute sort of credit. We have to unfortunately charge for this because behind the scenes there are some very, very expensive machines that have to be paid for. and most importantly, the artists need to get paid fairly, which is really important to us. But we are also adding some very interesting new features and the ability to license vocals very, very easily and get a response very, very quickly and be able to go and use your new AI vocal on your track. So
that's going to be huge.
Yeah, I'm so excited, man. Thanks a lot for allowing me to talk about it. And
dude, anytime. I would love to, whenever your album comes out, man, I'd love to come back and talk to you again, because there's so much more we could talk about. This is really fun, but it's like, what, midnight there? I don't want to keep you up.
We should I'll send it to you, and then if you don't then follow up with a request, I'll know that maybe it wasn't actually that good.
I will definitely follow up, but please, I would love to hear it, man. That sounds great.
Yeah, man, I will definitely send you a copy.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, thanks again, dude. I really appreciate it. This was a really cool conversation.
Great, man. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, man. It's really, really nice to meet you, Willy. Definitely stay in touch. Come and join our Discord.
Oh, I will. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, man. Take care.
Peace, man.